All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're taking a seriously high-speed journey through thousands of years of Western architecture. We're talking from the massive structures of the ancient world all the way to the smart buildings of tomorrow. We're going to see how our buildings really do tell the story of us.
So let's kick things off with a question for you. What on earth could a 5,000-year-old pyramid possibly have in common with, say, your local bank? Well, the answer is a lot more than you'd think. There's this direct line, this kind of architectural conversation that's been happening for centuries that connects them both.
So, where does our story begin? Well, like a lot of things, it starts in the ancient world. This is where the fundamental blueprints of Western civilization were drafted, not just in philosophy or politics, but literally in stone and mortar. Okay, so this is basically our roadmap for the whole explainer. We're going to start way back in the ancient world, zip through the medieval era, see the explosion of the Renaissance, get a little shaken up by the modern era, and then land right here in our contemporary world. Think of it as our own little architectural time machine. All right, so let's break down these ancient heavy hitters. First, you've got Egypt. They just mastered sheer, monumental scale. Their whole thing was to inspire awe. Then, the Greeks. They obsessed over perfection, proportion, and harmony, giving us those iconic columns we still see everywhere. And then you have the Romans, the master engineers. They gave us the arch and the dome. I mean, these were total game changers that let them build huge, open indoor spaces for the very first time. It was something the Greeks could only dream of.
So Rome falls. And after that, the world, and the whole reason for building stuff, changes completely. Europe enters the Middle Ages, and this entire era would be defined by two powerful and kind of competing priorities: faith and fortresses.
And this phrase right here, it just perfectly sums up the whole mindset. Building for God and for safety. Architecture became this incredible tool for both devotion and for defense. And that duality shaped the look and feel of the next 1,000 years.
You can see this duality play out perfectly in the two big styles of the time. First, there's Romanesque, heavy, thick-walled with these big rounded arches. These buildings feel grounded, solid, almost like castles. But then, an incredible innovation leads to Gothic architecture. The pointed arch and flying buttresses, those beautiful stone arms on the outside, meant you could shift the roof's weight outwards. All of a sudden, walls didn't need to be thick anymore. They could become these thin, delicate skeletons filled with massive stained glass windows. They were literally reaching for the heavens.
So after the Middle Ages, Europe just explodes with this cultural energy we call the Renaissance. It was a rebirth, right? And architects and artists looked backward to find their way forward. They rediscovered what they saw as the perfect forms of ancient Greece and Rome.
And this whole rediscovery kind of played out in 3 acts. The Renaissance itself was all about calm, rational harmony, perfect symmetry. Then came the Baroque, which took all those classical ideas and just injected them with a huge dose of drama, emotion, and over-the-top detail. And finally, Neoclassical. And hey, this is where your local bank comes in, which went back to the monumental, grand scale of classical buildings to express power and stability.
You know, for almost 2,000 years, Western architecture was in this constant conversation with its classical past. Then, the 20th century hits, and a bunch of radical thinkers basically decided to just hang up the phone. It was time for a complete and total revolution.
And their whole mantra was super simple: out with the old, in with the new, period. You had new technologies like steel and reinforced concrete, new ideas about society, and suddenly all those historical styles just felt, well, irrelevant. Ornament was basically seen as a crime. You kind of get an early hint of this break with Art Nouveau, which turned away from history and instead looked to nature for inspiration. You see all these flowing organic curves and patterns. But the real game changer? That was the Bauhaus school in Germany. Their core philosophy became the rallying cry for a whole generation. Form must follow function. They stripped buildings down to their absolute essential, geometric forms, arguing that real beauty was found in simplicity and usefulness.
And that kind of thinking eventually evolved into styles like brutalism, which, wow, it really took honesty to a whole new level. Its name actually comes from the French for raw concrete, and that's exactly what it was. Raw, exposed, massive structures that hid absolutely nothing about how they were made. Love it or hate it, you gotta admit, it was bold.
But, after a few decades of this super strict, minimalist modernism, some architects felt things had just gotten too cold and sterile. So, naturally, a reaction was born. Postmodernism. If modernism's slogan was form follows function, you could say postmodernism's was form follows fun.
It brought back humor, color, and these playful, often kind of witty, references to the very history that modernism had tried so hard to forget.
Which brings us all the way to today, right now. So what's driving the architecture of the 21st century? Well, the concerns are global, they're technological, and they're intensely local, all at the same time.
I mean, think about it. The best architects today are wrestling with some huge challenges. They're creating sustainable, green buildings that can produce their own energy. They're using advanced computer modeling to create wild forms we've never seen before. And they're really moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach to design, buildings that respond specifically to their local climate and their local culture.
So when you boil it all down, it's actually pretty simple. From the pyramids, built to last for eternity, to today's fluid, computer-generated designs, every single building is a snapshot. It's a physical story of the values, the priorities, and the technology of the people who created it. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. As we face a future that's being shaped by things like climate change and artificial intelligence, what stories will the buildings we're creating right now tell the people of tomorrow about us?